Welcome to another deep dive edition of the Chicks on the Right podcast. We have a special guest with us today, and it's Emily Jashinsky from The Federalist, writer, culture editor at The Federalist, and also podcast host of The Federalist Hour, and also so many other things that, like, it's making me feel inadequate. And so one of the very first things that we wanted to ask you about, Emily, is just to introduce yourself to our audience and let us know like how you got started, because you're a young thing and yet you've accomplished so much already. So tell us about your entrance into this world of politics and what you're doing today and about your new show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It was a pleasure to have you on Federalist Radio Hour last week, or last, well, I guess it was last month already. I can't keep track of time. I grew up in Wisconsin. I went to school at George Washington University, so I've been in DC for a while now. And I guess just got involved in politics by, it was a pretty liberal campus. So I got involved with Young America's Foundation when I was a student there. Then I was their spokesperson after I graduated and stayed in DC and wanted to be a writer. So I went to the Washington Examiner, then went from the Examiner to the Federalist, and have been doing sort of politics and cultural coverage for the last several years and hosting Federalist Radio Hour. So basically just growing up in Wisconsin, I was incredibly frustrated. I know I've talked to you guys on Federalist Radio Hour about the kind of Obama era, and that's sort of I was not to make myself sound too young, but I was in high school during the Obama.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
But for me, it was this sense of the sort of cultural contempt that people in Washington and Hollywood and New York City seemed to have for people like my family, people who went to church every Sunday and owned guns and hunted and fished and listened to country music and all that good stuff. Just the sense of elitism I found very, I think animating might be the right word. That's what I really wanted to do something about. And that's sort of why my interests fluctuate between politics and pop culture and everywhere that they intersect. So that's really what got me involved.
Okay.
I was just going to say, bravo for making it through college unscathed, because I know there are a lot of I say kids because at the time you were a kid. Now obviously you're not, but we've heard of so many young people that have gone to universities and they have been in similar situations as you. They were conservative. They were raised in conservative families. They had strong ideals, strong sense of self, and then they get into the university system and they don't make it out conservative. So, so bravo for doing that. I'm sure that you probably saw a lot of people your age that did not make it out unscathed.
One thing I see, because I still work with a lot of young people, I'm also the director of the National Journalism Center, which YAF operates. And so I work with college students a lot. And one thing that I see now more than ever, and this was true of me as well, is people going into college and emerging more conservative.
Okay.
Because you have this exposure. If you're somebody who's kind of curious and is in the center maybe, or center right, you are exposed to the worst of the left. The absolute height of their intolerance, the absolute height of their total disinterest in hearing any other side of the argument. So the lack of coherence that an ideology takes on when it's not challenged, and you end up becoming more and more conservative. And that was definitely my case. It was pretty difficult. I mean, we got into a couple of national media controversies because the left on our campus wanted to ban us and get us suspended because we didn't want to do mandatory pronoun training and whatever else.
My God.
But so it was it wasn't easy, but I definitely had the experience that I see more kids, especially post-Trump, more of the ones that are coming out post-Trump, they have seen the worst of the left and they become more conservative in college, which honestly is pretty fun to watch.
It is.
Well, that's super hopeful, right?
It is. Makes me
feel so hopeful.
Right. Because Mary has a son that's going to be going to college very soon. And I have 3 kids, 2 that are out of college and on their own, but then 1 who's 12. So it gives me a lot of hope. Yeah, because we both worry about that tremendously.
It should. I mean, it's a really bad look for the left on campus now. They look like just losers. It's so lame to need to enforce absolutely every pillar of leftism that doesn't make any sense anyway. So I guess in a sense it is hopeful.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Truly.
So one of the things, because like I said in the beginning, is that you're busy. I mean, like there's a lot of things that you're doing. You're director of that and leader of this and host of that and another host of this, and now you have a brand new show, right? So it's been a couple weeks now that it's been on Counterpoints. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. My friend Ryan Grimm, who's DC bureau chief of The Intercept and just a full-blown socialist, and I have hosted a show. We started our friends, Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball. They used to host Rising that The Hill had on weekday mornings. And so when they left to create their new thing called Breaking Points, which has been extremely successful, Ryan and I sort of subbed in while they were looking for other hosts because neither of us could do the job full-time. Then we got our own little thing called Rising Fridays that we had been doing since May. And when Sagar and Crystal asked us to come to Breaking Points, which is just a super, super interesting project. They've been really successful. They're a top podcast. They have a huge YouTube channel, almost up to 1 million subscribers. We were really excited about that. So what we do every Friday morning now is a full show where Ryan and I cover the news of the week from two perspectives. You get the sort of right perspective and you get the left perspective, and we think that's the best way for audiences to see the contrast and make up their minds for themselves. Hopefully you're hearing the best argument from the right and the best argument from the left. Hopefully that's the ideal conversation, and maybe there isn't a good argument to be made on the right or the left, and people can see that too on any given story. And we just believe that audiences are, we're journalists, but we believe that the audience is just like us. They want to make up their mind for themselves, and so hopefully we can help people work through that.
That's like a he said, she said. I mean, but like of the nth degree. So, I mean, have you gotten into fights? Do you expect to get into fights? And have you changed each other's minds on anything yet?
That's a great, yeah.
That's a really good question. So we've definitely gotten into heated exchanges is what I would say. But it's always one of the good things about our working dynamic is that we're both really curious always for what the other thinks about something. And so it's genuinely, I would say it's like having a conversation with your really good friend who disagrees with you on pretty much everything over a couple of beers. It's like totally good-natured and just curious and just talking, but it's in this sort of more formalized newsy context. So we are talking about the news of the week, and we are in a studio wearing mics and with lights and makeup, but we try to be, much more sort of open-ended with our conversations than typical, news media. And nobody is having, I think, conversations that are that open-ended in a formal news studio.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And I definitely change my mind all the time based on Ryan's reporting. He's one of the best reporters I've ever met. He does like really, really good shoe leather stuff over at The Intercept. And maybe he's changed his mind. I don't know. I haven't actually asked him that before, but we were live on air when the Dobbs decision came down we were still at the Hill then. And that was pretty incredible because we couldn't disagree more on a topic.
Wow.
And it was really something.
That is so fascinating because honestly, that's the way, again, I'm going to age us, but that's the way that we used to do things in this country. We used to talk to each other like that. We used to have lively discussions over beers. And, when we were in college, this is how we used to do it. We used to talk because I had friends who were crazy liberals, and we used to talk about stuff like this, and then we'd still be friends, and now, and I feel like we've lost the ability to do that. So it is really fascinating that you have a show that's basically, it's based on that premise. Like this is what you're doing. And so perhaps you're going to inspire people to start doing that again.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the thing is, the one thing that makes it possible is respect. And that's what you're saying is what's totally gone in politics. And I think a lot of it comes from the left because they've expanded the definitions of bigotry and of violence and, character. All of these different things that counts as somebody's character to include mere political disagreements. And I think when you could come to the table with somebody and say, I may think that your policy preference leads to bigotry, but I do not think that's your intention, and I don't think you agree that that's the outcome. Thus, I don't think you are a bad person or you are a bigot. That, I think, is the key to just coming to the table and respecting the other person's character, respecting that they genuinely want the best for the country and for the people of the country. At the end of the day, if you can do that, and if you can find somebody who's willing to do that, you can actually have those conversations. If you can't do that, it's just impossible to talk, because it's just every second, why not just walk off set if you're talking to a horrible person who's wrecking the country?
Right.
Well, and do you think that social media plays a role in that? Because I know you did a piece recently about just the negative side of social media. I mean, you have to wonder, because so much of the fighting takes place on it. When you see the Twitter fights and like all, people are just looking for that quick insult, that quick gotcha. And then you dehumanize each other so easily when you're at a keyboard, right? So do you think that plays into people's inability to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think it totally does. And I think the science on that, the social science on that, is increasingly clear, that these platforms are designed in ways that result in more division than unity, and that actually incentivize us to get into divisive conversations more than they connect us and make us united. And so I think they've really, really, really poisoned our politics. But and I think most people have come to understand that. But I think they've also poisoned the way that we interact with each other, because politics doesn't happen in a vacuum. As soon as you start thinking that somebody who doesn't share your beliefs on marriage or abortion or immigration is a bad person, that bleeds into everything else. And it bleeds into, those conversations that you have at the bar or that you have at Thanksgiving or whatever it is. So I think social media, the way it's designed, it's essentially, they've actually borrowed tricks from casinos. Like when you're scrolling on TikTok, they hide the clock. That's what casinos do. They hide the clock when you're scrolling on TikTok, so you don't.
Oh my God!
It makes it harder for you to keep track of how much time you've spent scrolling through videos. So
yeah,
I mean, when you create a slot machine type program for us to talk about our personal lives and our political lives and even our professional lives, man, like it has been a very bad experiment, and it's not just staying to social media anymore. It's like it's all around us.
Yeah, we're being experimented on. What is the saying? Is like social media isn't social at all. That's so yeah.
True.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
It's just not. Yeah.
Okay, so I told you guys ahead of us starting this broadcast that I wanted to share a clip of you that from an appearance that you made on Media Buzz, I guess a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, maybe now, and it was the context, because I'm not going to play the whole thing, but the context was that Lindsey Graham had made that comment about if Trump got indicted after all of the stuff at Mar-a-Lago, I think it was about the Mar-a-Lago thing, that it would cause riots, that people would riot and there would just be mass chaos. And everyone pounced. Everyone on the left pounced on that comment and made it sound and accused Lindsey Graham of inciting violence, which is so often the go-to, right? Like if someone says, listen, based on what we know, there's a lot of angry people who will be made even angrier if Trump is indicted, and therefore we have reason to be concerned that there would be backlash. That's a reasonable thing to say. I think that's what he tried to say. But of course, people pounced and were like, oh my God, he's calling for World War Z, essentially. So you were on, and I don't even know who this woman is. You can tell us her name if it is important, but
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay.
I think she was with her a couple of times. She does a decent amount of Fox, like playing the Dem sort of strategist.
Right. Okay. Well, and that's exactly what she was doing. And so she says her thing about how, well, yes, I mean, there are people who are super, super mad, who are going to cause problems. And it's wrong of Lindsey Graham to say that out loud, apparently, because he's inciting violence. And so the host of the show breaks in to say, okay, so it sounds like you're agreeing with Lindsey Graham. You're admitting that, yes, there are people who are likely to get super upset. And then that's when things went crazy. And this is when I loved your face. And so I want you to, I'm just going to play this and then you can tell us about what you were thinking. Because I love everything about this clip. Here it is.
With what Lindsey Graham said, you're saying he's reflecting reality? I think, no, I have a huge problem with it because I think what he's doing is directing people by describing what he thinks is inevitable.
But he didn't ask anybody to do that or suggest anybody do that.
Yes, but I think we're smart enough to recognize the subtleties and that doesn't have to be explicit. It doesn't have to be explicit. You can do this by saying
he's
this
condemned
institution
January
is against
6th.
you.
He's always condemned violence in January 6th. There's literally no indication from Lindsey Graham that he thinks any violence should be happening.
So why did he say that?
Because it's a description of the fact
that
you yourself just said there's a sleeping giant and a latent threat of violence in this country, which I actually think is true, and I think it comes from rhetoric on both sides.
Perhaps, well, it's always both sides, right? But I think that the problem is
indeed.
Hold on.
That was my favorite part when you were like, indeed.
Yeah, indeed.
That was my favorite.
Right.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I texted my mom after that. Her name is Laura Fink, and she's always been very courteous and kind off camera when I've been on with her. But I think I texted my mom immediately after that just to be like, did that come across okay? Because I realized maybe it was you really shouldn't be sarcastic. That's one of the first tips they give you on TV.
This is why we're never on TV.
Sarcasm.
We're
this
never.
Right
there. We're not. Yeah.
It doesn't always come across well, but I think that was warranted.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Of course it was warranted. That was just my absolute favorite. What was your take on Biden's 60 Minutes appearance the other night?
Yeah.
I mean, probably similar to you guys. Just it makes me sad that he's the president of the United States. It makes me sad for the country. It makes me extremely sad for his family that they are so power hungry. They allow this to happen, that they thought it was a good idea for him to run for president, that they are supporting his run for president, although he did actually hedge on whether he would run again in that interview, which I think is great news for the country, frankly. And it's likely that if he goes away, we end up with Kamala Harris, who's much worse probably in many ways. But at the same time, it's just profoundly sad that the representative, the leader of the United States of America, the chief ambassador of the free world, is incapable of stringing basic sentences together and seems to be honestly barely holding on to coherence. I think it just makes me sad. I don't know. I think it makes a lot of people sad probably.
Yeah. I mean, nobody in his family likes him. You know, it's like, it's this is what I've been saying for a while. It's like, he has a wife, you know, I mean, as somebody who is married and has been married for quite some time, you would think that his wife would be like, you know, I think we've had enough here, or just would have never done this to begin with to somebody that she supposedly loves. 'Cause it's mean. It's just really mean.
It is mean.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and do you think, okay, so because you mentioned Kamala and, you know, she is sort of the obvious next in line sort of person, but Gavin Newsom is, you know, he's like knocking at that door. I mean, when he starts demanding that Governor DeSantis debate him apropos of nothing, then you know that's what he's got his sights set on. So in a battle between the two of them, like, how do you think that would play out?
No, you're totally right. And I don't know that Gavin Newsom is totally on the radars of people here in DC, but he should be, because to your point, I mean, he's putting billboards up it's just like insane the extent that he's been trying to insert himself into the national conversation. So I think very clearly he probably is positioning himself, if Joe Biden decides not to run again, as the alternative to Kamala Harris. Although I think the incumbency, especially in a situation like that, would be hugely, hugely consequential for Kamala Harris if she wants to win a nomination. I think she would pretty much be coronated. I don't think it would be much of a competition. And Gavin Newsom is such a terrible, terrible candidate. Like, the only place he could win is California. I don't know how that man could win. And I mean, he can only win in deep blue enclaves because he's not even a talented politician from a purely sort of like Machiavellian standpoint. He's a terrible politician. He makes so many different mistakes in so many different ways that, you know, it's kind of unthinkable. But to your point, he looks like he's about to do it, which would be really fun because he's so bad. He's just so bad.
So bad.
And to watch him go after
dinner, I mean, it's just like unbelievable. He'd have a lot of money though.
Yeah. But he can't be much worse than her, though. I mean, she's terrible on her face, too. I mean, Kamala is a complete and utter disaster. So that I look at both of them and I think, oh my God, like, can you imagine one of those two, like, trying to run the country? I just can't, they're both awful. I mean, and then like whoever they decide, if they get the nomination, one of the two, and then they're running against somebody, whether it be a Trump or DeSantis or whoever it is on our side. I don't know. I don't think that they stand a chance. However, I don't. There's nothing. Nothing surprises me at this point.
Right.
Nothing.
Yes, yeah. Right. It's so hard to make any political predictions now. But it's unthinkable that Gavin Newsom, who's presided over disasters in many different areas in California, whether it's energy, whether it's fires, whether it's COVID, he has presided over all of these different total disasters, and is corrupt, obviously. Very obviously corrupt. To think that he could run off of the job he's done in California, that he could sort of parlay that into any sort of successful attempt to run the entire country is insane. And I don't know who would be so dumb as to put money behind it. But I think a lot of people will. But it is a good question, though. I don't know. You guys probably have thoughts on this. It seems like there's so little distinction between Democrats anymore, period. That like Joe Biden, as bad as he is the last sort of bulwark where he will say, we're going to fund cops in a State of the Union address. And I can't imagine another Democrat saying that at this point. And it's like, he's like the last of the boomer Democrats that were willing to talk to the center, even for nakedly political purposes. And so anyone else after him, it's going to be pretty close to just having, a Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Well, we know that his in-laws aren't going to put money behind him.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's the greatest story ever.
We love it so much.
I love that too. Well, before we let you go, one question, because I know we talked about this a lot on your podcast, and you were asking us about our feelings on Trump and the possibility of him running. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the possibility of a Trump 2.0, or would you prefer to see him step aside and let somebody else sort of make a run at it?
Yeah, I'm in the camp where it's like there's no clear answer to me because, and I wish I did have a black and white feeling about it, because politics does seem to feel like it always needs to be black and white. For me, though, he's the classic double-edged sword that all of the good things that Donald Trump does, I don't think are possible without the bad things. I don't think you get somebody who stands up for Kavanaugh. Like, I don't think any other president would have stood up for Brett Kavanaugh and refused to withdraw his nomination than Donald Trump, because he was
That's a great point.
It's a fantastic point.
He's so accustomed to being adversarial and hostile to the media. And I think Republicans after Trump would now be more willing to stand up for Kavanaugh. I don't know if they would, but they'd be willing to. But you don't get that without that part of Trump. You don't get someone going after CRT, and you don't get somebody taking on the media and calling out their lies without the Donald Trump that's tweeting about Mika Brzezinski's bad face lifts.
Right.
You can't have just one. And I do like what Ron DeSantis is doing. I like what some other folks are doing. I really like what Marco Rubio is doing. But I like, at the same time, can they be sort of the wrecking ball that Washington needs? I don't know. I don't know if it's possible if you're also not the crazy Truth Social QAnon person.
Right. Well, and then even if they could, can Trump even get there to do the things again? That's the question, right? Because there's a lot of people who think he's unelectable a second time around because of all the baggage and because of all the bad stuff that people have a sour taste in their mouth about or whatever. So, because I'm somebody that would vote for him a third time. If he's the guy, then I'm going to the polls and I'm voting for him. I just don't know if I want him to be that guy, Right.
Well, and I'm also curious here in DC, I think sometimes there's an overcorrection in that people are in the Beltway and now they're more aware that they're out of touch with the rest of the country in some pretty important ways. And so people on the right, I wonder if they overcorrect sometimes and just say, Trump is unbeatable. He's so popular. People love him. And I think that's true. But I also do think even Republican voters get exhausted with Trump in different ways. And if there were an alternative that wasn't Jeb Bush or Chris Christie or something like that, people would be more willing to. It's possible there would be a split. So I don't know. I'm totally up in the air on where people stand. And I guess that's why we have primaries to kind of suss all of that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you represent a lot of people. I think you do.
Who just don't know, who are just like, well, and the good news is that we've got 2 years to figure it out.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of time to play with.
Yeah.
Already 2 years. Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's crazy to think it's still that far away.
Yeah.
Well, Emily Jashinsky, so glad to have you with us. Thank you so much for being with us. It was a delight as always, and we can't wait to talk to you again. It's always a great time.
No, thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you for joining Federalist Radio Hour. It was so much fun, and I really appreciate it.
Tell people where they can find you real quick if they want to hear more.
Yeah, sure. Federalist Radio Hour is around on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you download, and I'm on Twitter at Emily Jashinsky.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks a bunch.